was joined late last year by Export New Zealand's Executive Director, Catherine Beard. Catherine is an advocate representing a broad cross-section of New Zealand exporters. We started our conversation looking at New Zealand's changing export scene, with the growth of New Zealand's digital and technology-based firms, the ongoing importance of New Zealand's food production sector, and whether technology exports will one day overtake dairy and tourism as our biggest export earner.
Yeah, look, it is a changing scene, very much so. And I think we've seen, particularly, we have these TIN reports, technology reports that come out every year. And I think they've done a really good job of highlighting the tech sector. And that includes sort of IT businesses and high-tech manufacturers. And I think we're seeing quite an increase in the diversity and the growth in that sector. So it's been a really great report that's actually put a spotlight on it and given it more visibility. And I think the report that's just come out very recently showed that they've had $1 billion growth from one year to the next. So that's really fantastic because that's a really rich ecosystem that, seems to be gathering a bit of a snowball effect. Not to say that our primary exports aren't important, they're hugely important. But I think the latest TIN report shows that we've got tourism, dairy, and then if you put that tech sector together, coming in at about number 3 for our exports. And I think people are becoming more confident. The visibility the reports give in the sector means that they can connect better with each other, keep an eye on each other and learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly what we see in the Export New Zealand network, is a lot of really great collaboration and support that exporters give each other, because essentially they're not really competing domestically, they're competing out there on the big world stage, and they realise the competition's out there, and if they can help each other succeed, then that's the way to go.
Do you share Greg Shanahan's predictions or forecasts around technology overtaking dairy and tourism within I think he says within the next 10 years?
Look, it could well do, and I think that's a good thing for the New Zealand economy, because we need to diversify. If we've got all our eggs in one sector, then if dairy has a downturn, it impacts on the whole New Zealand economy. So we need to have that burden shared more broadly across a broader swathe of industry and business. So, I think that's a good thing. It gives us more resilience as an economy. But again, not to take away from the agricultural sector, I mean, the tin is the whole of the technology sector, and you've got one company, Fonterra, doing a huge amount of trade. So, agriculture's I think it's always going to be important to New Zealand. They are the scaled up companies in the economy. They have deeper pockets. They have, long experience. And, the good thing about selling food to the world is people, when we go through hard times, when we have recessions and things, generally food's the last thing that people, they will get rid of luxuries. They'll batten down the hatches, but food and beverage actually are pretty resilient through that. So they're a really good thing to have in our economy. And of course we have a natural competitive advantage that we can do it at reasonably low cost because of our temperate climate.
Yeah, and there is a tendency to look at agriculture, right, as being just a raw commodity export. But actually there's a lot of services, there's a lot of R&D and technology that are going into, a dairy product or even, kiwi fruit being sold into the US and other markets, just huge levels of R&D to develop varieties. So do you agree with we tend to simplify the comparison a bit, or you always say technology versus agriculture?
Yeah, look, I completely agree. There's a huge amount of R&D and technology going into those agricultural products. quite fascinating, really. I've been in the university labs and seen the machines that have, helped measure and develop things like the mozzarella cheese, that typically, if you made it in the traditional way, it would take an awfully long time. They've managed to come out with beautiful mozzarella and sped up the process through tech, and there's a whole lot of that stuff going on. And if you talk to people in the horticultural sector, they'll say, actually, there's more New Zealand apples sold in the United States through us licensing the IP. So the varieties are developed here, and we've introduced more new apple varieties, I think, than anyone in the world, and we're now earning a whole lot out of leasing that IP in the US. So, that's pretty high tech.
We then shifted our conversation into looking at what New Zealand exporters do well and not so well, and the importance of the New Zealand brand story to exporters. For food producers, where provenance is important, it seems to work well. For digital firms, it's maybe less important.
We've got some great things going for us, and in part thanks to our really successful film and creative sector industry. People know about New Zealand now, and particularly in markets like the United States, where obviously the Lord of the Rings and all of that movie action kind of put New Zealand on the map. That's helped for our tourism earnings, because a lot of people have New Zealand on their bucket list. They want to come here. And so when our exporters go out into market, still some people will have no idea where New Zealand is, but, it does help open doors. Flight of the Conchords, people mention that a lot in the United States, had a bit of a cult following, I believe, and that's all really helpful for New Zealand projecting its image. On the downside, there's been a bit of research done about how we're perceived in international markets. New Zealand Story, which is part of NZTE's, just going around the country at the moment, sharing the results of that. And particularly in a market like the US, culturally we can be quite humble. We can maybe sometimes not be as professional and as hard-hitting as we need to be. So, we really have to understand each market that we're going to, how people perceive us, what success looks like, how we need to change it up, because what will work in one market won't necessarily work in another.
Yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting thing to come out of one of your panels at Go Global, which was held back in October. You had a panel with a number of tech companies, and there was quite a divergence in views on how valuable the New Zealand brand story is. And so you had some companies that they're a New Zealand company, but they project themselves as an American firm. And then you had another one, I can't remember the name of the company, who was, that was at the forefront of their branding. They're a New Zealand firm and they're up here and they're doing something different.
Yeah.
So it's a sector to sector, seem to be a sector to sector choice, right?
Yeah, look, I think the New Zealand brand part works particularly well for food and beverage. It's the provenance thing, and it marries up with our clean, green, nice environment image, high food safety, reliability, those kinds of things. So for food and beverage, I think they definitely often want to be promoting that they're from New Zealand. If you're a tech business, maybe that's not so important. The important thing's the technology you're selling. And maybe you want to act like you're from a bigger market that's better known for tech. But I think that will change over time as well. It really depends. A company like Avanti, for example, that was a New Zealand company that did the bikes, and they purposefully chose a name that sounded like it was Italian. Because they didn't, they wanted to be seen to be more international, more sophisticated maybe. But, I do think that is changing, but definitely food and beverage are most often the ones that are keen to promote the New Zealand origin.
We also looked at the results from the recent ExportNZ DHL Export Barometer and how New Zealand exporters see their prospects for the 12 months ahead. What's interesting is that despite the uncertainty in the geopolitical environment, they remain incredibly positive. Catherine talks about the sophistication of New Zealand exporters and how they deal with market risk.
Yeah, well, look, 60% I think were confident that their sales or the export revenue is going to increase in the next 12 months, and that's really positive. I think the thing with the exporters is they do kind of spread their risk a bit. So if New Zealand economy takes a downturn, that's tough, but sometimes they are exporting into countries who've got rising GDP. So I think one of the bonuses for New Zealand is we've found ourselves in a geographic region essentially, and we've realised actually we're quite close to Asia. And Asia has been booming. The rest of the world, the more advanced big economies have had pretty flat growth, whereas consumers right through Asia are getting more money in their pocket. Their livelihoods are improving, there's a growing middle class, and actually geographically, we're part of that region. So I think that's a cause for positivity. The fact they can spread their risk. If one market gets harder, they can double down on a market that's going well. And I think actually just kind of have to be an optimist to be in the exporting space, because you're going to have a lot of barriers and a lot of roadblocks, and you just need to keep working through those.
On the prospects of a free trade agreement between New Zealand and the United States, Catherine highlights that it's already a good place to do business without a free trade agreement. Negotiations can take a long time and span administrations, and sometimes there are strategic and geopolitical reasons for larger nations to do agreements with small countries like New Zealand.
Yeah, look, I think New Zealand's wanted a free trade agreement with the US for a long, long time. And we've had a few things that have gotten in the way over the years. The tricky thing for us, I guess, is, how compelling is it for them to have a free trade agreement with us, and who's got the negotiating power? It does seem a little bit like a David and Goliath situation, but sometimes New Zealand's been, quite good at getting free trade agreements, such as the China one, with a much bigger partner, because sometimes they want to do it for other reasons, more strategic or geopolitical reasons. So I think we should always keep the door open. We should always be talking with that as an end goal. And often these things take a lot of time. So what you start under one administration is not necessarily going to be finished under the same administration. So I don't think we should, we all know the current president's got a very US first approach, but we have to also keep in mind that our trade balance is actually very even. We buy as much off them as they buy off of us. So I think it's, in trade terms, it's very equal and even, and it's a win-win. I guess the question is, can we make it better? It's already a good place to do business without a free trade agreement, and you can see that from the export stats, but it could be better.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's our third largest two-way trade market, and I think what's quite interesting or exciting about the NZUS trade relationship is what we trade in with them, and it's kind of heavy balance of IP and commercial services and those parts of our economy that are transformative. So I think that's quite an interesting thing about that relationship. You talked about strategic and geopolitical reasons. What would some of those be?
Well, I guess, New Zealand is part of the Asia Pacific. And if the US wants to continue to have influence through the Asia Pacific, ideally we would have liked them to have taken a leadership role in the TPP, as it was called back then. And that, I think that would still be a great option for the US at some future date to rejoin the CPTPP. But yeah, it's that kind of notion that if you want to be influential in a region, you need these sort of relationships. I mean, we already work together closely in the Five Eyes on defence and security. So a free trade agreement would just solidify the relationship and bring us closer together.
Finally, we looked at what's exciting on the business and export front, the incredibly fast growth of New Zealand's tech sector, the importance of the older generation of New Zealand tech entrepreneurs as investors and supporters of New Zealand's tech ecosystem, and the momentum and snowball effect happening there. We also look at the role of Māori business and Māori exporters, which Catherine describes as New Zealand's future big multinationals in New Zealand's economy.
We can see from the TIN report that it's the technology companies and services businesses that are growing at a really fast rate. So I think that's exciting, and I think we do have a bit of a snowball effect going on. I think we've got more and more entrepreneurs in the ecosystem that have had a lot of success with different businesses. So, it's not their first business, and you've got people like Steve Saunders and Peter Mayer and Rod Drury who've all had a really successful businesses, and then they take it to the next level. They're getting more outside investment from places like the US and around the world. They're partnering with global, really big businesses that can take their product global, and they're not needing to hold on to 100% of what they've developed. So I think we're seeing more of that sophistication in terms of some really experienced entrepreneurs in the ecosystem taking it to the next level.
Yeah, I think what's quite cool about each of those examples too, Peter Mayer, Steve Saunders, and others, is they develop this network around them, and you see younger entrepreneurs kind of joining in, their funding. They become investors into those operations, and so it's that snowballing, I guess, effect you get. And it's really great. At our annual Go Global conference, we always have a Tech Tigers session where we have some fast-growing tech companies talk about their journey and what they're doing, and it's really interesting for the more mature businesses and the older business people in the room, because they're hearing from these young people, and they're completely doing things differently, and they're using technology, and so there's actually a whole lot of smarts, as you say, that we can marry up between these tech tigers coming through with a different way of operating and breaking the mould, and then the seasoned, experienced people at the other end of the spectrum who, have all those great networks, probably have funding and have some wisdom. So it's a good combination. Yeah. I've heard you talk about the Māori economy and Māori exporters. It's obviously an area of personal interest to me. Is that another exciting? Yeah,
very exciting. I've for several years been to the FOMA conferences, the Federation of Māori Authorities, and Māori business, they like to fly under the radar a bit until they've really made it. But man, if you go to those conferences, it's very inspiring. There's a huge diversity of really exciting things going on. And I kind of see them as being the big multinational businesses in the New Zealand economy going forward, because their ownership of a lot of our primary sector assets is now quite considerable, whether that's farming, fishing, forestry, etc. But they're also diversifying. They're getting big enough, some of them, to want to spread their risk and diversify into other things. But the reason I think they'll be our big multinationals in the New Zealand economy is because they have a long time horizon. They don't intend to sell things out. They tend to be long, they're not going to sell land or assets. So they will just reinvest for future generations, and they'll get bigger and bigger. And that's cool, because one of the challenges for New Zealand in the tech sector is they get to a certain size and tend to get bought by overseas businesses. Not that that's a bad thing, because if the founder owner was here, the money comes back to New Zealand. They invest in another business, and it's all, it's positive. But the good thing about Māori businesses, they're here for the long term, and because they're reinvesting, I can just see them getting bigger and bigger.
I hope you enjoyed that short discussion with Catherine Beard from Export New Zealand. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing your expertise, experience and insights. I think there is plenty there to be excited and positive about. Certainly a key theme to come through for me was around the increasing prominence of technology, services and IP-based trade in New Zealand's overall export profile, and the importance of the New Zealand-United States relationship in this growth as a market, as commercial partners, as investors, as a country with which we share a language, similar legal systems, and an ease and cultural understanding of doing business.